I never thought an ordinary Sunday afternoon would turn into the moment that shattered my world. My name is Thomas Bennett, and at 62 years old, I've lived through enough storms to believe I'd seen it all: losing my wife to cancer, retiring from a demanding finance job, adjusting to a quieter life where the loudest sound most days was the ticking of my grandfather clock. But nothing prepared me for what I found the day I decided to visit my daughter, Sophia. Sophia is my only child, my anchor after her mother passed. She was always the light in our house, bright, curious, with paint-stained fingers from her art classes and a laugh that carried through every room. Watching her grow into adulthood was my greatest joy. And when she married Andrew Miller, I wanted to believe she had found the partner she deserved. He looked the part, polished, polite, a man with plans. But I'd lived long enough to recognize the cracks. The too perfect stories about his work. The evasive glances when money came up in conversation. The subtle tension in Sophia's smile when she said, "Everything's fine, Dad." Lately, those cracks had widened. Phone calls grew shorter, and then stopped altogether. When I pressed her about it, she brushed me off, insisting she was busy with school and home. But my gut, that instinct every parent carries, told me something was wrong. So, on that Sunday, I got in my car and drove across town. I told myself it was just a quick visit, a father's check-in, nothing more. The streets were quiet, the winter air sharp enough to sting my lungs as I walked up her driveway. Her car was parked at a strange angle. The curtains were drawn, even though it was early afternoon. Every detail set my nerves buzzing. I rang the bell. No answer. Knocked. Still silence. Finally, I pressed against the doorknob, expecting resistance. The door gave way with the faintest creak. And in that single moment, my world shifted. I stepped into the house I thought I knew, but what I saw inside wasn't just unusual, it was terrifying. It was the kind of sight that makes your blood run cold, the kind that forces your hand to reach for your phone. Because there was no other choice. I had to call 911. The moment the door swung open, a draft of cold air rushed past me, carrying a smell I couldn't immediately place. It wasn't the scent of food cooking, or the faint perfume my daughter usually wore. It was sharp, chemical, and unsettling. My stomach tightened as I stepped inside, my hand still resting on the doorknob as though part of me wanted to slam it shut and walk away. The living room looked wrong. Too still, too staged. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the afternoon light, leaving the space cloaked in half-darkness. My daughter, Sophia, loved sunlight. Her paintings, which often hung around the room, thrived in it. She used to tell me that light was what made colors breathe. But here, in her own home, there was no light. Just shadows. I called out softly, "Sophia." My voice echoed in the silence. No answer. I walked further in, my shoes making soft thuds against the hardwood floor. The house had been decorated neatly, but something about it felt abandoned. A half-empty mug of coffee sat on the table, the liquid congealed and cold. A sketchbook was sprawled open on the couch, pencil lines half-finished, as if my daughter had set it down mid-thought. It reminded me, painfully, of another time. Years ago, when she was only 12, I came home to find her asleep at the dining room table, crayon still in hand, her head resting on unfinished homework. Back then, I'd smiled and carried her to bed, proud of her determination. But this scene wasn't endearing. It was eerie. "Andrew?" I called this time, my voice firmer. "Are you here?" Again, silence. The air felt heavier with each step I took, as if the house itself were holding its breath. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but being a father means you push through fear. It means you keep moving, even when your body begs you not to. I passed through the hallway, my eyes catching on the small family photos lining the wall. Sophia and Andrew smiling at their wedding, her white dress glowing in the summer sun. Another picture of them on vacation, standing on a beach I knew they couldn't have afforded. And finally, a photo of me, Sophia, and her mother years ago, before cancer hollowed out the woman I loved. My heart twisted at the sight. Sophia had once said those photos reminded her of home, of safety. Now they looked like relics in a shrine. When I reached the kitchen doorway, my breath caught. The chairs were overturned. One lay on its side, another pushed awkwardly against the wall as if someone had shoved it in a hurry. On the counter, shattered glass glittered like jagged stars. I froze, my eyes sweeping the room, my chest tightening. Then I saw it dark stain streaked across the tile floor. At first, I told myself it was wine. Please, let it be wine. But the longer I looked, the harder it was to deny what I already knew. It was blood. My knees weakened. For a moment, I thought my body might give out, collapse right there in the kitchen. I gripped the counter to steady myself, my pulse roaring in my ears. God, no, I whispered, my throat dry. And then I heard a faint sound. Not from the kitchen, but from somewhere deeper in the house. A muffled noise, soft and broken, like the whimper of someone trying not to cry. My heart lurched. Hello. I called, my voice sharper this time. There was no reply, but the sound came again, more desperate now. It was coming from the basement. I moved slowly, my every step deliberate, my body tense with dread. The basement door stood slightly ajar, a shadow stretching across the floor like a finger pointing downward. I pushed it open, wincing at the faint creak of the hinges. The smell that hit me then was stronger, sharper sweat, fear, and something acrid I couldn't place. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended. The basement was dim, lit only by a single bulb swaying slightly from a cord. Boxes lined the walls, old holiday decorations and storage, but my eyes locked on the figure at the center of the room. Sophia. She was slumped against a support beam, her wrists bound with rope, her ankles tied. A strip of duct tape covered her mouth, her eyes wide and frantic as they met mine. She shook her head urgently, muffled cries spilling past the gag. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. My daughter. My little girl. Bound and terrified in her own home. I rushed to her, my hands trembling as I yanked the tape from her mouth. She gasped, sucking in air, sobbing as words tumbled out. Dada Andrew. Shoo, sweetheart, I said, fumbling at the knots on her wrists. You're safe now. I'm here. But my hands were clumsy, shaking too hard to untie the rope quickly. The panic in her eyes grew sharper. No, Dada's still here. He's coming back. The word struck me like ice water. Andrew wasn't gone. He was nearby. Maybe even watching. My phone was already in my hand, my fingers dialing on instinct. The number every American knows, the one you never think you'll need until you do, 911. As the line rang, I pressed the phone to my ear, my other hand still tugging at the knots. My voice shook, but it was steady enough. This is Thomas Bennett. I need help immediately. My daughter's been attacked. She's bound in her home. Please send someone now. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline, asking for the address, the details. I gave them, my words tumbling out faster than I could process. Behind me, Sophia sobbed, her voice cracking with terror. And all the while, one thought pounded in my head, relentless as a drumbeat, he's still here. Somewhere in the shadows of the house, Andrew Miller was waiting. The operator's voice on the other end of the line kept me anchored. Calm, professional, guiding me through the panic clawing at my chest. Stay on the line with me, sir. Officers are on their way. Can you confirm again your daughter is restrained, and the suspect may still be in the house? Yes, I whispered, my eyes darting to the shadows at the edge of the basement. Every creak of the pipes, every sigh of the house made me flinch. Her husband Andrew Miller. He tied her up. He's not here now, but he could come back any second. Understood. Stay where you are. Help is less than 10 minutes away. Keep your phone with you. 10 minutes. It felt like 10 years. I shoved the phone in my pocket and went back to the knots, my fingers raw and desperate. Sophia's wrists were red, rope biting deep into her skin. "Dad," she gasped, her voice hoarse from screaming into the gag. "He said he'd be back. He said if I moved, her words broke into sobs. "Don't think about that now," I murmured, working the rope loose. "You're safe. You hear me? You're safe." When the knots finally gave way, she collapsed against me, her arms trembling as they wrapped around my shoulders. For a long second, I held her, my cheek pressed to her hair, the smell of dust and fear clinging to her. She was alive. That was all that mattered in that moment. But Sophia wasn't done speaking. She pulled back, her eyes wide and terrified. "Dad, you don't understand. This wasn't random. He planned this. He took out," her words cut off when the sound of tires crunching gravel reached us from above. Both of us froze. Was it the police? Or was it him? I pressed a finger to my lips, urging her into silence. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might shake the walls. We crept up the basement stairs, each step groaning beneath us. At the top, I eased the door open a fraction. Red and blue lights flashed through the slats of the curtains. Relief surged through me so hard my knees almost buckled. It was the police. I threw the door open and stumbled into the front hall just as the first officer pounded on the doorframe, shouting, "Police! Anyone inside?" "Yes," I cried, waving them in. "Here. Down here." 2 officers swept in, weapons drawn, scanning the rooms. Behind them came another pair, moving with quick, precise steps. The sight of their uniforms, the weight of their precinct seat was like breathing again after nearly drowning. Sophia clung to my arm as we guided them back toward the basement. One of the officers, a tall woman with sharp eyes, bent down to her level. "Ma'am, you're safe now. We'll take care of you. Can you walk?" Sophia nodded, though her body shook like a leaf in the wind. They led her outside, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. I followed, still gripping her hand like it was the last tether holding me upright. Outside, the night air hit me like ice. The street was lit up with flashing lights, the kind of chaos that draws neighbors to their windows. I caught sight of Mrs. Harlow across the street, peeking out from behind her curtains, her face pale with curiosity and fear. Sophia sank onto the back of an ambulance, medics swarming around her. One of them gently examined the rope burns on her wrists, murmuring words I couldn't hear. I stayed close, but my eyes never stopped scanning the shadows, convinced Andrew might appear at any moment, stepping out from the dark with that smug, calculating grin. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just a flicker, a silhouette at the far end of the street, lingering half-hidden behind a parked car. Tall. Shoulders hunched. The shape of a man who didn't want to be seen but couldn't quite tear himself away. My gut clenched. "Detective!" I shouted, pointing. "There. That's him." The officers turned, their flashlights slicing through the dark. For a split second, the beam caught his face. Andrew. His eyes glowed with something feral, anger, desperation, maybe both. And then he bolted. "Go! Go!" an officer barked. They gave chase, boots pounding the pavement, radios crackling with urgency. I stood frozen, my chest heaving, watching as Andrew disappeared into the night with half the police force at his heels. Detective Samuel Price arrived minutes later, his unmarked sedan screeching to a halt. He was a broad man in his 50s, with lines etched deep around his eyes and a presence that filled the space without him having to raise his voice. He approached me calmly, though his gaze was sharp. "Mr. Bennett?" he asked, flashing his badge. "I'm Detective Price. I understand your daughter is the victim here." Yes, I said, my voice hoarse. He tied her up. He left her in that basement. If I hadn't come, my throat closed around the words. Price gave a single nod, steady and firm. You got here when you needed to. That matters. She's alive. He glanced at Sophia, speaking briefly with the medics before turning back to me. She's going to need to give us a statement when she's ready. But I also need to hear everything you saw tonight. I swallowed hard, trying to gather my scattered thoughts. The door was unlocked. The house was dark. The kitchen was a mess, broken glass, blood on the floor. Then I heard her in the basement. She said he planned it, that this wasn't an accident. Price's brow furrowed. Planned it? I nodded. She tried to tell me before the police got here. Something about insurance. Something big. Price's eyes sharpened, as if the final piece of a puzzle had just clicked into place. He glanced back at his partner, then at me. We'll get the full story. For now, I want you to stay with your daughter. We'll take it from here. As he turned away to coordinate with his team, I sank onto the bumper of the ambulance beside Sophia. Her hand found mine again, weak but steady. Dad, she whispered, her eyes glistening under the harsh red and blue lights. He wasn't just trying to scare me. He wanted me gone. The words hit harder than anything I'd seen in that house. Harder than the overturned chairs, harder than the sight of her bound to that beam. My daughter, the girl I had raised with every ounce of love I had, was nearly erased, not by a stranger, but by the man she trusted most. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close, vowing silently that Andrew Miller would never get another chance. Not while I still drew breath. By the time the ambulance pulled away with Sophia inside, I felt like my bones were hollow. I rode with her, refusing to let go of her hand. The sirens wailed above us, bouncing off the buildings as we sped toward the hospital, but all I could hear was her uneven breathing and the way she whispered my name every so often, like she was afraid I might disappear if she stopped. At the emergency room, nurses rushed us inside. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the smell of antiseptic sharp enough to sting. They led Sophia to a curtained bay, lifting her gently onto the bed. Her wrists were raw, the rope burns angry and swollen. A doctor examined her quickly, shining a light in her eyes, asking questions in a calm monotone. Do you feel dizzy? Any nausea? Did you lose consciousness? Sophia answered in short bursts, her voice hoarse. No, dizzy, tied up basement. The word stabbed at me. I stood nearby, clutching the rail of the bed until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to do something, anything, but all I could do was stand there, helpless, as strangers treated the damage my own son-in-law had inflicted. Detective Price arrived not long after, flanked by a young officer carrying a notepad. He nodded to me first, then turned his attention to Sophia. His tone softened, but his eyes were sharp. Sophia, I know this is difficult, but we need your statement. Can you tell me what happened tonight? She glanced at me, her eyes wide, and I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. It's okay, I murmured. Tell him. He needs to know. She nodded weakly, then looked at the detective. It started weeks ago. Andrew was stressed, more than usual. He'd get home late, smelling like whiskey. He said it was work, but I knew. I knew it was money. She paused, swallowing hard. Then one night, I found papers on his desk. A life insurance policy. In my name. For $2 million. The room seemed to tilt under me. Even though I'd suspected something terrible, hearing it spoken aloud by my daughter sent a chill down my spine. Sophia's voice cracked, but she kept going. I confronted him. He told me it was for protection, that he wanted me taken care of if anything happened to him. But I knew better. I saw the signature lines. He'd signed for me. Forged it. I should have told someone then, but I didn't want to believe it. Tears welled in her eyes. I thought maybe I was imagining things. That maybe he really was just stressed. Price leaned forward. And tonight? Sophia shuddered. He came home angry. Said he was out of time. That the bills were piling up. I told him we could figure it out, but he laughed at me. He said I didn't understand that I was worth more to him dead than alive. Her voice broke into sobs. Then he grabbed me. Tied my hands, my feet. He shoved me into the basement and left me there. He said he'd make it look like an accident. Every word cut me open, raw and deep. I had to force myself to stay still, to let her finish, even though all I wanted was to storm out of the hospital and hunt Andrew down myself. Price scribbled notes, his face unreadable. When Sophia finished, he spoke quietly. You did the right thing by telling us. This gives us what we need to move forward. I know it's painful, but you've given us the truth and the truth is powerful. Sophia nodded, wiping her tears with the blanket. Price turned to me then. Mr. Bennett, I won't sugarcoat this. Andrew is dangerous. Men like him, drowning in debt, are unpredictable. But with your daughter's statement and the evidence we're collecting, we have a strong case. What I need from you is patience. Let us build it right. I clenched my jaw, fighting to steady my voice. Detective, patience isn't something I have much of right now. My daughter almost died in that basement. He's walking free, and she's lying here with bruises on her wrists. His eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. I understand. But if we move too quickly and he slips through, we risk losing everything. We need to catch him with evidence that even the best lawyer can't tear apart. The logic was sound, but my heart rebelled against it. Patience didn't feel like strength, it felt like surrender. Still, I nodded. Fine. But if you falter for even a second, I won't. That night, after the detectives left, I sat by Sophia's bedside as she drifted in and out of sleep. Machines beeped steadily, nurses moved quietly, and I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Memories flickered through me: Andrew's fake smile at family dinners, the way he always avoided eye contact when I asked about his business, the time Sophia assured me she was happy even when her eyes told me otherwise. I should have pressed harder. I should have seen it sooner. That guilt gnawed at me, sharp and relentless. Around midnight, Sophia stirred, whispering, "Dad." I leaned forward instantly. "I'm here, sweetheart." Her voice was faint but steady. "Promise me he won't win. Promise me he won't take anything more from us." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I promise. He's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet." But deep inside, I knew the battle wasn't over. Andrew was still out there, desperate and cornered. And a cornered man will do anything. That night, as I sat in the hospital chair with Sophia's hand in mine, I made a vow. Not just as her father, but as the last line between her and the man who wanted her gone. Andrew thought he had power. But he had never gone up against men really. And I was done underestimating him. The hospital became our fortress for the next few days. Officers guarded Sophia's door, nurses checked her vitals hourly, and I barely left her side. Yet even in that cocoon of safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that Andrew was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for a chance to strike again. Detective Price came back on the third morning, carrying a thick folder under his arm. He closed the door behind him, his face grave. "Mr. Bennett, Sophia," he began, "we've been digging. What we found makes it very clear, Andrew Miller wasn't just desperate, he was drowning." He spread the folder's contents across the rolling table beside Sophia's bed. Credit card statements, bank records, past due notices. A mountain of debt staring back at us in cold black ink. $180,000 across multiple cards, Price said, tapping the top page. A second mortgage that stripped every ounce of equity from your house. And here's the kicker: $60,000 borrowed from a private lender in Philadelphia. Not a bank. Not even a credit union. We're talking loan sharks. Sophia's breath hitched. He never told me, she whispered. He said we were fine. He said the new contracts at his company were paying off. I clenched my fists. He doesn't have a company. He has excuses. That's all he's ever had. Price nodded, his eyes locking with mine. And when those excuses ran out, he found another way. The insurance policy. $2 million, signed 3 weeks ago, with him as the sole beneficiary. Sophia looked down at her hands, the raw rope burn still visible, healing slowly. He made me think I was crazy, she said softly. When I found the papers, he swore it was to protect me, that he'd forged my signature because he didn't want to bother me with paperwork. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Her voice broke, and I reached over, squeezing her hand. Sweetheart, you didn't fail. He lied. He manipulated. That's what men like him do. Price leaned back in his chair. What you need to know now is this: he's cornered. The loan from Philadelphia was due last week. He missed the payment. Which means, aside from the police, he's got dangerous people looking for him. He's desperate. And desperate men make reckless moves. Sophia shivered under the thin hospital blanket. So what happens now? Price folded his hands. We build the case. We already have your statement and your father's. The insurance policy ties his motive, and the debts explain his desperation. What we need is the final piece: the attempt. He needs to make a move that we can tie directly to intent. My temper flared. He already did. He tied my daughter up and left her to die in a basement. Price didn't flinch. And we'll charge him for that. But in court, defense attorneys will spin. They'll say it was a fight, a misunderstanding, maybe even claim he was trying to stop her from hurting herself. We need a smoking gun, something undeniable. If we wait, he'll slip. He'll reach out. He'll try again. That's when we catch him. I wanted to argue, to demand action now, but the cold logic in his voice reminded me of something I used to tell my own clients in finance: haste is expensive. If you want to win, you build a case that can't be broken. Still, patience didn't ease the dread in my chest. That night, while Sophia slept, I stepped into the hospital hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the empty chairs and polished floor. I leaned against the wall, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My face looked older, harsher, carved by sleepless nights and fury. My phone buzzed. A new message. It was from an unknown number. You should have stayed out of it, Thomas. This isn't over. My heart pounded. I knew that voice even in text. It was Andrew. I rushed back into Sophia's room, my hands shaking as I showed the message to Detective Price when he arrived minutes later. He studied it with a grim expression. He's watching you. That means he's close. The police traced the message to a prepaid phone, purchased with cash at a convenience store across town. No camera footage. No fingerprint. Just another mask. Sophia woke when she heard us talking. Her face went pale when she saw the message. He won't stop, Dad. He won't. He'll keep coming until... I cut her off, pulling her into my arms. No. He's already lost. You're alive. He failed. And every step he takes now just builds the case against him. But even as I said the words, a small voice inside me whispered that Price was right: a cornered man will try again. And deep down, I knew Andrew wouldn't go quietly. The next morning, Price returned with news. We've located a property Andrew's been frequenting, he said. An abandoned farmhouse outside town. We'll stake it out tonight. I should have felt relief. Instead, my stomach churned with dread. A farmhouse. Isolated. Quiet. It was exactly the kind of place a desperate man might make his last stand. As Price left to coordinate the operation, I sat beside Sophia's bed again, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Dad," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Promise me something." "Anything," I said. "When this is over, no matter what happens to him, don't let him take away who I am. Don't let me live the rest of my life afraid." Her words pierced me. I kissed her forehead gently. "I promise. You're stronger than he'll ever be." But in my heart, I knew the promise meant more than comfort. It meant war. Andrew had set the stage. And tonight, under the shadow of that farmhouse, we were going to end it. By dusk the following evening, the air was heavy with the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I drove out with Detective Price and his team, the headlights of our convoy sweeping across empty fields. The farmhouse sat hunched in the distance, its roof sagging, its walls leaning like a tired old man. If houses could carry shame, this one did. Price parked the unmarked sedan a quarter-mile down the gravel road. "We go in slow," he told his men. "We don't know what he has inside: firearms, traps, maybe nothing at all. But don't underestimate him." He turned to me. "Mr. Bennett, this is where you stay in the car." I shook my head before he even finished. "No. You told me yourself Andrew will try again. If he does, I need to be here. He needs to see me standing." Price's eyes hardened. "This isn't about proving something. This is about survival." "Detective," I said, my voice low but steady, "you've got a badge and a gun. I've only got my word. My daughter is alive because I found her, not because I stayed behind. Don't ask me to sit this out." For a moment, he studied me, the lines of his face unreadable. Finally, he sighed. "Stay close. Don't move unless I tell you." The officers spread out across the property, their flashlights flicking like fireflies in the dark. The field grass hissed against my legs as we approached the barn. I could smell mildew, old hay, and something faintly metallic. The air was too still, as if the earth itself was waiting. One officer tested the side door. Unlocked. He pushed it open with the barrel of his gun. The inside was worse than I'd imagined. Broken furniture littered the floor, beer cans stacked in corners, a mattress stained with God knows what. And scrawled across one wall in jagged black marker were numbers: debts, amounts, tallies. Andrew's handwriting. I recognized it from signatures on birthday cards, now warped into something desperate and unhinged. Price swept the room with his flashlight, his jaw tightening. "He's been living here." Then, from the shadows above, came a sound: a creak of wood. Everyone froze. The flashlight beams tilted upward, cutting across the rafters. For a second, I thought it was empty. Then a figure shifted, stepping into the light. Andrew. His eyes gleamed, wild and bloodshot, his hair hanging loose around his face. He clutched a pistol in one hand, the barrel flashing silver in the beam. "Well," he drawled, his voice raw. "Looks like the family came to visit." "Andrew Miller," Price barked, his weapon raised. "Put the gun down now." Andrew ignored him. His gaze locked on me, sharp as a blade. "Thomas. Always playing the hero. Do you know what you've done? You've ruined everything. Do you think Sophia's safe now? Do you think you've won?" I forced myself to stand tall, though every nerve screamed at me to run. "She's alive, Andrew. That's all that matters. You failed." His laugh was sharp, broken. "Failed? No. You don't understand. I was so close. That money, 2 million, wasn't greed, it was survival. You think you can protect her forever? You're old, Thomas. Weak. I was her future. You were her nightmare, I snapped. The officers inched forward, their movements deliberate, like predators circling prey. But Andrew's gun swung wildly between them and me. He wasn't bluffing. He was desperate. You don't know the people I owe, he hissed. They'll come for me. They'll come for her. That money was the only way to make it stop. No, I said firmly. Killing her was never the way. That's not survival. That's cowardice. His eyes twitched, his jaw working furiously. For the first time, I saw the truth beneath the anger and bravado. Andrew was terrified. Price's voice cut through the tension, steady as stone. Andrew, listen to me. This ends here. Drop the weapon. You still have a chance to walk out alive. For a heartbeat, Andrew wavered. His arm shook, the gun trembling in his hand. I thought the Peta might listen. But then his gaze snapped back to me, and his face hardened. You took everything from me, he spat. You always looked down on me. Sophia was mine, and you poisoned her against me. I shook my head slowly. No, Andrew. You did that yourself. And then he moved. The gun swung toward me, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that split second, time fractured. I heard Sophia's voice in my head promise me he won't win. I saw her as a little girl, holding my hand on her first day of school. I felt the weight of my vow. The shot exploded, deafening in the hollow barn. I flinched, but I was still standing. Andrew wasn't. He collapsed, the gun skittering across the floor, kicked away by an officer in a single swift motion. Price stood over him, his own weapon smoking. Andrew groaned, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his shirt. It's over, Price said, his voice calm but firm. You're done. Officers swarmed, cuffing Andrew as he writhed and cursed. He spat blood, glaring up at me with wild, hate-filled eyes. This isn't the end, Thomas. You hear me? You'll regret this. I stared down at him, my hands trembling, my chest heaving. And yet, I felt no fear. Only pity. You already ended yourself, I said quietly. The moment you betrayed her. They dragged him out, his curses fading into the night. When the barn finally fell silent again, I realized my legs were shaking. Price turned to me, his face weary but resolute. You okay? I nodded, though the word felt hollow. She's safe. That's all I need. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Andrew might have been taken away in chains, but the shadow he cast still stretched long over our lives. The battle wasn't just about arresting him. It was about proving the truth in a courtroom, tearing down every lie he would try to spin. And I was ready. Because now, it wasn't fear that fueled me. It was resolve. The farmhouse raid ended with Andrew bleeding, cuffed, and dragged into the night like a feral animal finally cornered. But if I had learned anything in my 62 years, it was that men like him don't give up easily. They twist, they squirm, they claw at any crack in the wall to escape. At the hospital later that night, while Sophia slept in a sedated haze, Detective Price joined me in the cafeteria. He sat across from me with a paper cup of bitter coffee, his expression carved from stone. He'll lawyer up, Price said flatly. Men like him always do. They'll try to spin it say he was drunk, desperate, confused. Maybe claim you provoked him. I leaned forward, my hands folded tightly on the table. He pointed a gun at me. He tied my daughter up and left her to die. What more do you need? Price's gaze didn't waver. I know it. You know it. But courtrooms don't run on what we know. They run on evidence, procedure, perception. Andrew's smart enough to play the role of misunderstood husband, pushed too far by debt. He'll cry on the stand if he has to. The thought of Andrew performing for a jury, eyes wet, voice trembling, weaving another web of lies, made my stomach turn. I clenched my fists. So what do we do? We build a fortress, Price said. Brick by brick. Every debt, every false signature, every shred of evidence tying him to that policy. And we prepare you and your daughter to testify. The interrogation tapes came a few days later. Price invited me to watch from behind the glass. Andrew sat at the metal table, his arm in a sling, his face pale but his arrogance intact. When the detective began, Andrew leaned back in his chair, smirking like he was the smartest man in the room. "You've got it wrong," he said smoothly. "I never meant to hurt Sophia. She tied herself up. She has episodes. Ask her doctor. She makes things up. She's been under stress." I nearly lunged at the glass, fury surging through me. Episodes? My daughter, who had spent her life building beauty, teaching art to children, now reduced to a liar in his story. The detective pressed on, showing him the forged insurance paperwork. Andrew's smile faltered only slightly. "That? It's a precaution. I didn't want her to worry about finances. I forged her name, yes, but only because she hates paperwork. It was for her protection." Every word twisted truth into a mockery. He even managed a tear, dabbing at his eyes with the back of his hand. "I love her. I would never hurt her. I was just scared." Watching him, I understood something chilling. He believed his lies. They weren't performances, not entirely. In his mind, his betrayal was rational, even noble. That was his power, the ability to cloak malice in justification. But I also knew lies, no matter how polished, always left cracks. And that was where truth lived. Sophia gave her full statement once she regained her strength. I sat beside her as she recounted every detail, the threats, the ropes, the way Andrew whispered that she was worth more to him dead. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. When she finished, she slumped back against the pillow, drained but unbroken. Price nodded, his pen scratching across his notebook. "That was brave," he said softly. "The jury will believe you." Later, alone in her room, Sophia turned to me. "Dad, what if they don't? What if they believe him?" I took her hand, squeezing it firmly. "Then we show them who he really is. Not the man in a suit with crocodile tears, but the coward who couldn't face his debts without turning my daughter into a line item on a balance sheet. You survived, Sophia. That's our truth. And truth always leaves a mark." She nodded slowly, though fear lingered in her eyes. Weeks blurred into months as the legal machine ground forward. Andrew's lawyers tried every trick, motions to suppress evidence, challenges to Sophia's credibility, accusations that I was manipulating her. But Price and his team countered each one. Every morning, I woke early, sat at my old desk, and went through the stack of documents we had gathered. I made notes, cross-referenced dates, highlighted inconsistencies. My career in finance had taught me one skill better than any other: finding the lie buried in numbers. And Andrew's lies were everywhere. I found records of him withdrawing cash before the insurance policy was filed. Bank transfers that lined up with the date he purchased that prepaid phone. Even a pawn shop receipt for Sophia's missing jewelry, dated months before she had accused herself of misplacing it. Each discovery was like a brick added to the fortress Price promised. And yet, at night, when the house grew quiet and Sophia finally slept, doubt gnawed at me. Juries were human. They could be swayed by a tear, a sob, a convincing performance. Andrew had fooled us for years. What if he fooled 12 strangers for just a few hours? One evening, while reviewing the documents, I caught myself gripping a photo of Sophia when she was 5 years old, missing teeth, paint smeared on her cheeks, holding up a crooked drawing of our family. Tears blurred my vision. No jury in the world will believe his lies, I whispered to the empty room. Not if they see what I see. But I knew it wasn't that simple. The night before the preliminary hearing, Andrew tried one last trick. A letter arrived at my door, hand-delivered by some courier. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in his neat, confident handwriting. Thomas, it read, you don't understand the forces at play here. This isn't just about me or Sophia. There are people who will come after both of you if this goes forward. Do the smart thing. Drop the accusations. Protect your daughter. If you keep pushing, you'll regret it. I read it twice, my hands shaking, before folding it carefully and placing it in an evidence bag. Fear flared in my chest, but it quickly cooled into something sharper. He was still trying to control the narrative, to make me doubt, to bend me with threats. But I wasn't the same man who had stepped into that dark house weeks ago. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a witness. A protector. A man who had already faced the monster hiding in his family. And tomorrow, in court, I would face him again, not with fear, but with truth. The courthouse smelled of dust and varnish, a mix of history and judgment baked into every wooden bench. I had been in courtrooms before, years ago as a forensic accountant testifying about corporate fraud, but never like this. Never with my own daughter sitting beside me, her hands trembling in her lap, and the man she once called husband smirking across the aisle. Andrew wore a dark suit, his sling gone, his hair perfectly combed. To a stranger, he looked like any successful young man unfairly accused. To me, he looked like the wolf he truly was, calm on the outside, but calculating, his eyes scanning the jury box like a salesman sizing up customers. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My knees cracked, a reminder of age, but my resolve held. This was no longer just about survival, this was about truth. The prosecution started strong. Detective Price took the stand first, laying out the evidence with his steady, gravelly voice. He held up photographs of the farmhouse, the ropes, the gun Andrew had dropped when the SWAT team stormed in. Then came the documents, the forged insurance policy, the forged signature, the purchase trail of amiodarone pills from a shady online pharmacy. Price explained it all like a story, each piece falling neatly into place. I watched the jurors carefully. Some leaned forward, brows furrowed. A few shook their heads. They were listening. That gave me hope. But then it was the defense's turn. Andrew's lawyer, a polished man in a silk tie, rose smoothly, his tone calm, sympathetic. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're hearing is not the story of a criminal. It's the story of a man under pressure, a husband terrified of losing the woman he loves. Yes, mistakes were made. Yes, paperwork was handled poorly. But this? This is not a murder plot. This is a misunderstanding, twisted by grief and paranoia. He gestured toward me. Thomas Bennett is a retired accountant, a man who has admitted himself that he sees lies everywhere. Isn't it possible, even likely, that he's reading deception into situations where none exists? I gritted my teeth, my hands tightening on the armrest of my chair. I wanted to shout, he tried to kill us. But I stayed still. Losing my temper would only feed their story. When it was Sophia's turn, my heart pounded so hard I thought I'd faint. She walked to the witness stand in a plain dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked fragile, but her voice, though soft, was steady. She described the night at the farmhouse. How Andrew lured her there. How he tied her up, how he told her she'd never leave alive. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She told the truth, every word of it. Andrew stared at her the whole time, his expression unreadable. At one point, he even forced a sad smile, shaking his head as if she were inventing it all. That small act of contempt nearly broke me. The defense attorney cross-examined her gently, too gently, as if speaking to a fragile doll. He tried to plant seeds of doubt. Sophia, you've been under stress, haven't you? Your father has suggested Andrew wasn't good for you before. Couldn't it be that you misinterpreted his actions, that fear made you imagine things? She looked him straight in the eye. Fear didn't make me imagine the rope burns on my wrists. She raised her hands, showing faint scars that were still visible. A hush swept the courtroom. Even the lawyer faltered. I felt pride surge in my chest. My daughter had just shattered his facade with one sentence. Finally, it was my turn. I rose slowly, walking to the witness stand. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was razor-sharp. I took the oath, sat down, and faced the room. The prosecutor guided me through my testimony. I explained how I had grown suspicious, how I found the forged insurance documents, how I discovered the vial. I described the tightness in my chest that night, the dizziness, the realization that I had been poisoned. I spoke like I always had in my career, precise, methodical, numbers and facts laid out like a ledger. I pointed to the motive, debt. I pointed to the means, poison and rope. I pointed to the method, a staged heart attack. The courtroom was silent except for my voice. Then the defense had their turn. Andrew's lawyer walked slowly, deliberately, until he was standing just a few feet from me. Mr. Bennett, he began smoothly, you've spent a lifetime finding lies in numbers, haven't you? Is it possible that your suspicion blinded you to the truth? That you're misinterpreting what you found? I met his gaze, steady. Numbers don't lie. People do. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The lawyer pressed harder. You've admitted you never trusted Andrew. Isn't it possible that your bias has colored everything you've seen? That you wanted him to be guilty? I leaned slightly forward, my voice calm but firm. Bias didn't put a Miodoron in my bloodstream. Bias didn't forge Sophia's name on an insurance policy. Bias didn't tie my daughter to a chair with duct tape. Andrew did those things. That's not interpretation. That's evidence. The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it again. He turned away. When I stepped down, I finally looked at Andrew directly. For the first time, his mask cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. It was only a flicker, but it was enough. He knew I wasn't afraid. The prosecutor gave his closing statement the next morning. He laid out the case in 3 words, motive, means, method. He called Andrew a man who saw his family not as loved ones, but as financial opportunities. The defense painted him as a desperate husband who made poor choices. They begged for sympathy, for mercy. And then the judge gave instructions, and the jury left the room. Waiting for a verdict is like drowning in silence. Sophia and I sat together, hands clasped, as hours dragged into a full day. Andrew sat with his lawyer, whispering, smiling faintly, like he already knew the outcome. But when the jury filed back in, I saw their faces. They weren't smiling. They weren't relaxed. They carried the heavy weight of truth. The foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Andrew Miller, guilty of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and unlawful imprisonment. The words rang like a bell through the courtroom. Sophia gasped, covering her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. I closed my eyes, whispering a silent thank you to God. Across the room, Andrew slumped, his mask finally shattered. No smirk. No performance. Just the hollow stare of a man whose lies had collapsed under the weight of truth. For the first time in months, I breathed freely. The morning of sentencing dawned cold and clear. Frost glazed the courthouse steps, glittering under the pale winter sun. As I walked up those stone steps beside Sophia, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The storm that had ripped through our lives was nearly done. All that remained was the final strike of the gavel, the last number entered into the ledger of justice. Inside the courtroom, Andrew sat between his attorneys, his hands cuffed, his orange jumpsuit a sharp contrast to the polished image he had once so carefully crafted. The smirk was gone. His posture had collapsed inward, as though the weight of truth finally bent his spine. For months, he had performed at the farmhouse, in interrogation, even here in court, but the curtain had fallen. The audience had walked away. He was no longer the star of his own story. The judge's voice was firm, measured, devoid of sympathy. Andrew Miller, you stand convicted of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and unlawful imprisonment. Your actions showed not only criminal intent but a profound betrayal of the very people you swore to love and protect. The words echoed like a funeral toll. For these crimes, you are sentenced to 35 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 20. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Sophia squeezed my hand so tightly I felt my knuckles pop, but I welcomed the pain. It was the pain of release, of something breaking free. Andrew barely flinched. He stared at the floor as though it might open up and swallow him whole. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. When we stepped out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed, their microphones flashing like weapons. They asked if I felt vindicated, if Sophia felt safe, if justice had been served. I didn't give them the dramatic soundbite they wanted. I simply said, the truth always balances the books. And then we walked past them, hand in hand, toward the quiet waiting beyond. That evening, we sat together in my living room, the fire crackling softly. Sophia's face was pale, but her eyes burned with life again. She was safe now, though scars both visible and hidden would remain. Healing takes time. Do you think he'll ever understand what he did to us? She asked quietly. I stared into the flames, watching the wood collapse into glowing embers. I don't know, I said honestly. But it doesn't matter anymore. Understanding won't change what he did. What matters is that we survived. That we're free. She nodded, tears glistening, and leaned her head on my shoulder. For the first time in months, I felt her weight as something steady, not fragile. Life after betrayal isn't clean. It doesn't reset neatly, like flipping a page in a book. It lingers, like the faint smell of smoke after a fire. But little by little, Sophia began to rebuild. She returned to her art classes, guiding children through brushstrokes and colors, her laughter creeping back into her voice. I rebuilt, too, though in smaller ways, planting a new garden, repairing the porch swing, walking the old dog down familiar streets. Each small act was a brick, a way of declaring, we're still here. The insurance company sent letters. Investigations into fraud meant no payout would ever reach Andrew's hands, nor anyone else's. His scheme had turned to dust. The house he tried to build on lies had crumbled before it could stand. For me, numbers and ledgers had always been my tools, my way of making sense of chaos. But this ordeal had taught me that some debts can't be calculated in dollars. Betrayal, trust, love, those don't fit into neat columns. They weigh heavier, cut deeper. And yet, even those debts can be balanced, if not in money, then in truth. Months later, I stood in my study, holding a checkbook. Not the trust Andrew tried to exploit, not the accounts he hoped to drain, but my own modest savings. I thought about what Sophia and I had lost, but also about what we had gained, clarity, freedom, a chance to start fresh. I wrote a check to a local community fund that supported survivors of domestic and financial abuse. In the memo line, I wrote, in honor of Sophia. My hand didn't shake. The signature at the bottom was firm, steady. It was a declaration not of revenge, but of restoration. Because justice isn't always about the sentence a man receives. It's about the lives rebuilt afterward, the spaces healed, the dignity reclaimed. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and the fire burns low, I think about Andrew. Not the criminal in the jumpsuit, but the man I first met, the polished smile, the rehearsed charm. I wonder if there was ever a moment, even a flicker, when he loved Sophia without condition. Or was it always a performance, a mask hiding the hunger underneath? But I don't dwell there long. That path leads nowhere but shadows. Instead, I think of Sophia's laughter echoing again in my kitchen. I think of the children she teaches, the way their bright eyes mirror the little girl she once was. I think of the future, not the one Andrew tried to write for us, but the one we're building ourselves. And for the first time in a long time, I feel something close to peace.